Breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently. Don't
miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. Today we'll be discussing the Cumbria coal mine, Halifax Bank's pronoun badges and lots more. But first, folks, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Just after 2 o'clock, here's the latest. The Foreign Office says it condemns the exploitation of prisoners of war and civilians for political purposes. That's after Russian state media claimed that 2 more British men have been charged with carrying out mercenary activities by a Moscow-backed separatist region in Ukraine. 22-year-old aid worker Dylan Healy and military volunteer Andrew Hill are believed to be held in the self-styled Donetsk People's Republic. That's according to Russian news agency TASS. However, there's been no independent verification of the charges. Last month, British fighters Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were sentenced to death for the same charge in the region. The Prime Minister is facing questions over his delay in suspending the Tory whip from MP Chris Pincher following allegations of sexual misconduct. Mr Pincher's being investigated by Parliament's watchdog after being accused of groping 2 men at a private members' club while drunk on Wednesday. Boris Johnson resisted calls to act until the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme launched an investigation after it received a complaint. Mr Johnson is said to be troubled by the allegations. Luke Pollard, Shadow Minister for the Armed Forces, says the situation has been handled poorly.
Politics really should reflect the best of our values as a country, and I'm afraid what we're seeing at the moment is yet another Conservative MP after Conservative MP doing something utterly appalling and seemingly being protected by Downing Street. If the Prime Minister had an ounce of decency, he would have withdrawn the whip immediately, not waited to see if he could sit it out to reward this arch-loyalist with that little bit more protection. I'm afraid it really stinks.
Moving abroad, and a major search and rescue operation is underway near Hong Kong after a ship snapped in 2 and sank during a severe tropical storm. The Hong Kong Government Flying Service released footage of a crew member being winched to safety just seconds before the vessel was overcome by waves. Authorities say 30 people were on board the vessel and 3 have been rescued so far. The government is considering allowing extra long-term mortgages on family homes as part of plans to ease the housing crisis. It means that people could be able to buy more expensive properties with no expectation that they'll complete the repayments during their lifetime. The house and any outstanding debt could then be passed on to their children. Searches for bowel cancer symptoms on the NHS website have gone up tenfold following the death of Dame Deborah James this week. Health Service figures show there were 23,000 hits the day after Dame Deborah died on Tuesday. That's up from 2,000 the day before. The podcaster and campaigner passed away after a 5-year battle with the disease. The Royal College of Nursing is calling for its members to be fully involved in the government's inquiry into the COVID pandemic. It follows claims that staff were left at risk without proper guidance, effective testing or protective equipment. Meanwhile, the Office for National Statistics says weekly UK infections have gone up by more than 500,000, with 2.3 million recorded now. That's the highest estimate since late April. Azim Majid, Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College, says 2 factors are behind the increase.
One is people are mixing much more now. The summer people are socialising with each other, going to events, parties and so on. The second factor, which is probably more important, is we're facing new subvariants of Omicron, what are known as BA4 and BA5, which are highly infectious, which spread very easily. And so these new subvariants are really driving the numbers up in the UK and in many other countries as well.
British drivers were handed a record 8.6 million parking tickets for leaving their cars in places like shopping centres and service stations. The DVLA says an average of 23,000 tickets were issued every day from April 2021 to March of this year. The government's Levelling Up department says it's determined to end rip-off parking practices. And former Rangers and Scotland goalkeeper Andy Gorham has died at the age of 58. Gorham revealed in May that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Issuing a statement this afternoon, Rangers paid tribute to the legendary goalkeeper. He made 260 appearances for the club between 1991 and 1998, winning 5 league titles and multiple trophies. He also won 43 caps for Scotland. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up on the show today. Will the Green Lobby block the UK's first new coal mine in decades and increase our reliance on Russian imports? Or will, folks, common sense prevail? We'll be debating that very issue. And the charity founded in the name of the fundraising hero, Sir Captain Tom Moore, is under investigation. Was there profiting from the pandemic? And should the government crack down on internet gambling and football club advertising? More big state bullying from Big Boris, or some sense at last? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts on Scotland signing away our sovereignty by joining the EU if it leaves the United Kingdom. Tweet me about that. Or you can email me, folks, on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us on YouTube, and of course, don't forget Facebook. Loads of brilliant content on our page there. Now, folks, the march towards ever more extreme net zero targets, is that finally coming to an end? I think it might be. For years now, British politics has been greener than Kermit the Frog. Governments of red and blue have appeased green vested interests, Greta Thunberg's, the painfully middle-class eco-terrorists, and have all had an eagerness to outspend each other on their new eco-friendly pet projects. But are we now ready to say enough is enough? Has the green utopianism finally run up against economic reality? Has this generation-defining cost-of-living crisis brought the eco-loons in government back down to planet Earth? Or are we destined to turn seasick green each time we open our energy bill estimates? Will that, folks, become the norm? This week, one of the most powerful men in the country, who you've maybe never heard of, certainly never voted for him, he published a report which could affect your life for decades to come. Lord Deben, the government's supposedly independent climate advisor, who has a huge influence over how the UK reaches its ambitious net zero target, or net stupid in my opinion, he published his annual Committee of Climate Change report. Now, often, the government basically rolls over and asks Lord Deben to rub their belly. They accept the recommendations without question. But this time, a minister, Greg Hands, he hit back at some of Debon's comments and defended the government's approach and record of cutting down on coal. Now, let's get some perspective here, right? The UK is seeking what amounts to the immiseration of the working class, a prescription that'll ultimately lead us to be colder and poorer. Everyone from the Treasury to the extreme green activists, they admit that. And the UK's targets can only impact a mere 1% of global CO2 emissions. Do you think President Xi of China will be bankrupting his nation in order to appease the green lobby? China accounts for nearly a third of global emissions. In fact, it emits more greenhouse gas than the entire developed world combined. And you see, if we were to meet the government's net zero target, or again, that net stupid target, we have to use technologies like wind and solar to get there. Without some new technology coming galloping down the hill like a knight on a valiant steed, we simply cannot get there without decimating the economy, decimating our lives, and seriously rationing our energy usage. If you think popping to your local supermarket to fill up your tanks pretty tough right now, you just wait. The reality is that we need fossil fuels and will need fossil fuels for decades to come. Renewables are unreliable. The wind doesn't always blow. Battery technology is poor, and nuclear takes years to come online. We'll still need coal in industry for steel production, and we still need CO2-emitting cement, for example, for the construction of those great big wind turbines. What do you think builds them, right? These great big infrastructures, whopping great big things. So why don't we, I think it's common sense, source these essentials here at home, not from nations with lower environmental standards, like Russia? There's absolutely no way around this reality, other, frankly, than cutting down on power use, cutting down on construction, and massively reducing the progress we make as humans, human flourishing, say goodbye, and increasing poverty and suffering in the UK and around the world. Now, all across Europe, nations are turning towards coal and gas to ease the crippling energy crisis, which is frankly choking the economies of Europe throughout the continent, threatening to destroy growth and industry, and, as I say, increase poverty. And meanwhile, the ban on fracking in the UK could be lifted within days. Happy days, I say. The Mail reported this week if a scientific review by the British Geological Survey finds that the risk of earth tremors can be minimised, then the only alternative is more of the net zero emergency if we don't actually seek these measures, and an exacerbation of the cost of living crisis that we've started to get a snapshot of. This is just a snapshot of what's to come. And I agree with the Lord Frost, the former Brexit minister, who wrote this week, "I don't like poverty, I don't like artificial limits on human aspiration and potential, and when you don't have enough energy, you get a lot of both. That's why we need to change tack now." A man after my own heart, I tell you that much. He's right. And as the recent Australian elections have taught us, folks, when a Conservative government attempts to out-green the Greens, the public just wonder, why don't I just vote for the real thing? Now, folks, as I mentioned in that monologue there, the government's top Green advisor, Lord Debon, made a series of policy demands this week. He called plans for a new coal mine in West Cumbria absolutely indefensible. The mine isn't being built to generate energy, but it's for coke and coal. It's a product used in the steel industry, and some of it's currently imported from nations like Russia. Energy Minister Greg Hands hit back at Debon and defended the government's record of reducing coal production. So is it time to mine for that black gold that once powered an empire? Well, joining me now to discuss is the presenter of the Sustainable Futures Report podcast, Anthony Day, and General Secretary of the Mine Workers Union, Chris Kitchen. Chris, can I start with you, please? This mine and its coal, right? It won't be used for energy, but industry. Could you just explain how this differs from perhaps the stereotypical mine that we've been used to in the past?
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that for the good of the country, we need to retain some ability to produce our own steel. In order to do that, you need coking coal. The coal that will be mined from the West Cumbria mine is coking coal. It's not steam coal. It's not to be burnt in power stations to produce electricity. And it's got to be better for the environment to mine it in the UK, to burn it in the UK to produce steel, than what it has to mine it elsewhere in the world and transport it all the way over here in order to burn it. You're still going to get the same CO2 emissions from burning it, no matter where it comes from. But the carbon footprint of transporting it halfway around the world is a lot higher.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, how does that differ? How does the process differ from modern mining processes right now? How do they differ from the days of my granddad going down the pit, right? That stereotype is very much not how things are these days, is it?
It isn't. There's been some big technological advances in coal mining from the old days of pick and shovel. We now use, higher, more productive equipment. We're a lot more aware of the environmental impact, and there's all sorts of things in place. We're also, prior to the demise of the UK coal industry, one of the safest coal mining industries in the world, and that was something we were proud of. The coal mine can produce coking coal without adverse effects to the environment and the locality. It can produce, we can have 500 decent, well-paid, unionised jobs.
Okay. Anthony, you've heard what Chris has had to say there, Anthony. I'm wondering, given that we have better environmental standards than, say, Russia does, should we not seek to actually source that coal that we still need during this transition to actually mine and produce here in Britain?
Well, I think the problem is that Chris MacDonald of the Materials Processing Institute has pointed out that the coal which will come from the West Cumbria mine will not be suitable for British Steel. Their process cannot use it, so it'll be exported, and British Steel will have to continue to import. So the carbon footprint will go in both directions. The other producer is Tata Steel, which can possibly make use of a small amount of this new coal, but it won't replace anything from Russia because Tata doesn't buy its coal from Russia at the moment. So I don't see the logic, and I have to support Lord Deben, because although the process itself will be environmentally controlled, and it'll be far better, I'm sure, than the old-fashioned and traditional mining, at the end of the day, you've got a fossil fuel. And if you burn a fossil fuel, you end up with carbon emissions. And that is what we're aiming with what I prefer to call net zero. That's what we're aiming to achieve by 2050.
Yeah, for my radio listeners, we're just showing the Cumbria mine, the proposal on our screen there now. Chris, to me, the whole idea of this country saying, oh, well, we can't possibly do any of this, we can't frack for gas, for example, natural gas, which, by the way, has allowed the United States of America to really cut down on CO2 emissions. It's beat Europe in many senses. I think, actually, I disagree politely with Anthony. I think net zero is net stupid. I really, really do. Where are you on that?
I think, with the greatest respect to Anthony, he's got a view. I don't think that we're at odds in that we do need to do something about climate change. I think the problem is that Anthony's talking about experts and people that, are supposed to know what they're on about. I'm talking about common sense, and common sense to me says that if you're going to burn it, surely it's better to mine it here and transport it a shorter distance than what it is to import it. I think Anthony's forgot about the carbon capture and storage technology, which, had we have followed what the NUM wanted 30 years ago instead of the vindictive policy of just closing coal mines down, which was not because to save the environment, that was to pursue a political vendetta against the miners and the unions of this country. We could now be world leaders. You've seen what's happened Nobody expected the government, regardless of what party is in power, to be able to predict what's happened in the Ukraine or the pandemic or even the financial crisis of 2008. But these things happen. What we do expect is our country to protect us from these things when they do happen. Had we have followed carbon capture and storage, which it was an option that was discussed and funded by the Labour government when Ed Miliband was the DEC minister,
Okay.
we could now have our own energy produced from our own coal, carbon neutral. We would not be suffering the high energy costs. Everybody in this country, when they pay their electric bill, will be paying for mistakes being made in the past that they didn't make.
Right. Anthony, on that point then, Chris has mentioned some technology there. What technology do you think would replace coal? How can we move away right now from fossil fuels? Because, Anthony, I think you'll agree with me that right now, wind and solar can't possibly replace powering your gas boiler, for example, can they?
OK, well, let's just pick up a couple of points. I totally agree with Chris that we are paying the penalty for bad decisions made in the past. Also, he said carbon capture and storage. Yeah, it's a technology which works, but it's a technology which is very expensive and it puts up the price. And if we use carbon capture and storage and other nations don't, their product's going to be cheaper. So that's your dilemma. Now, you asked me about alternative sources of energy. Yes, wind and solar, they don't run all the time because solar doesn't work at night and the wind drops from time to time. So what we've got to do is look for energy storage. Now, you mentioned batteries. Batteries are expensive for all sorts of points of view. There's pollution involved and all that sort of thing. But they're not the only solution. One of the things we can do is we can create hydrogen, and hydrogen is a store of energy. So if you've got surplus wind power, you've got surplus solar power, you convert it into hydrogen, and then you can burn that in a turbine. You can burn it as you would North Sea gas, but hydrogen is completely clean. So there are technologies, and those are the technologies that we should be introducing to create those 500 jobs, not last year's or last century's technologies.
All right. Chris Kitchen, in a very brief sentence, if you would, you're just harking back to the past here and not getting with the future. Do you agree with that?
I disagree with that. I think we believe that coal can be part of the solution to climate change if it's invested in. Yes, there will be an increased cost, but the way that the government's currently going, we're talking about building 8 to 10 nuclear power stations. And from an environmental point of view, I'm not aware that we've overcome the problem of nuclear waste. So we're talking about generations, and we're giving them a different problem to the one that we're solving. That's
we'll have to leave it there, but two views, very interesting. That was the presenter of the Sustainable Futures Report podcast, Anthony Day, and General Secretary of the Mine Workers Union, Chris Kitchen. Thank you both very much. Plenty more to come, folks, this afternoon on Real Britain. Next up, the pronoun badge row that led to Halifax Bank telling customers they can close accounts if they don't like its politics. But first, folks, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be showery for many, with the heaviest and most frequent rain across Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and after a pretty wet morning for some due to a front passing through, you can expect showers to end the day. In the southeast, that front will be moving across, but it has broken up somewhat, so many will just see some showery rain for a time. Across Wales, we can expect further showers, perhaps a few heavy ones too. They'll start to ease as we go through the evening and especially overnight. There'll also be showers across the West Midlands as we go through the evening. They should be fairly scattered, so there'll be some drier and perhaps brighter breaks in between. It looks like there'll be fewer showers around the northeast, but still a few though, so although it's looking mostly dry here, don't rule out some rain at times. A wet picture across much of Scotland. Here the showers are likely to merge into longer spells of rain, especially across western parts with the risk of some thunder. A scattering of showers for Northern Ireland as well. Some heavy ones are likely in the east at first, then there may be a drier spell for a time. Further showery rain is expected overnight, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst England and Wales should be drier. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We're trying to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, Halifax, the bank, has told customers to close their accounts. Charmin, if they oppose a policy allowing staff to display their personal pronouns on their name tags. When tweeting a picture of the name badge with the pronouns she, her, /hers, and the caption pronouns matter, the bank was quick to respond to complaints on social media. They said that Halifax wanted to open the conversation around gender identity. They said, we care about customers' and colleagues' individual preferences. For us, it's a very simple solution to accidental misgendering. You would think there were no real problems in the world. So are they really striving for inclusion, or have they just lost their way? Well, joining me to discuss this is the columnist and writer Josephine Bartok. Josephine, thank you very much for your time today. What were your initial reactions when you heard this story? Because some people might just be thinking, well, who cares ultimately? It's just a badge.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I can see it sort of seems like, you know, fiddling with name tags whilst Rome burns. It seems like a minor thing. But actually, it's part of a much bigger problem. And I mean, just to put this in context, a couple of weeks ago, I asked people in city law firms and banks to get in touch about equality and diversity training schemes and initiatives at their work. And I was absolutely inundated by often quite senior people who were furious about what was happening within their organisations, because something like a pronoun badge or adding pronouns to signatures is not neutral. What that says is, as an organisation, we don't believe biological sex matters. Now, for Halifax in particular, and indeed for the banking sector more widely, it clearly does, because actually we know that there is, for example, a significant pay gap when it comes to the difference between men and women. And when I tried to get people to talk on the record about sort of what was going on in their organisations, very few would. And these were senior people. And if they weren't prepared to speak out about it, it doesn't matter if Halifax says it's a choice. Clearly, this is something that is, in some senses, compelled speech. You're sort of being forced to go along with an ideological viewpoint. And it's about as appropriate as expecting staff to all wear crucifixes.
And Joe, I'm wondering then, do you think, because they are saying this is optional, right? But do you think you'll have a workforce which, frankly, is really, really quite scared to turn around and say, well, actually, no, I don't want to wear one of those. Do you think actually there is sort of de facto coercion here because people will be so terrified of being called a TERF or whatever else that people get called for believing in women these days?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it is an absolutely career-ending smear to be called transphobic. I mean, you know, we've seen people having book contracts pulled. We've seen sort of quite significant discrimination against those who hold gender-critical beliefs. Now, gender-critical beliefs are actually protected in law, but frankly, if you're, if even senior people in companies aren't prepared to push against this, and I totally understand their reasons for not doing so, if even they're not comfortable doing it, then what's it going to be like for the cashier who says, I don't want to wear this name badge?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, many people, of course, have, and you'll have seen this online, Joe, but many people have responded by actually saying to Halifax, right, mate, I'll take you up on your offer and I'll close my account. Are they adding a new meaning to a certain je ne sais quoi to the expression go woke, go broke?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's definitely something that seems to be sort of pushed by the US. The whole sort of, the rainbow wash during Pride Month. And, I mean, I know people, actually quite a lot of those who got in touch with me recently were lesbians and gay men who were just like, well, what has my sexual orientation got to do with this sort of rainbow wash everywhere? And yeah, I think actually customers are getting fed up with it because, there's a cost of living crisis, there's an energy crisis, as you've just been discussing. There are real significant problems. And when you go to your bank asking for a mortgage, you really don't expect them to be sort of wasting money and virtue signalling about bloody pronouns.
Yeah, well, indeed. I mean, do you actually think, though, that this is just, we've got to accept it, and you and I, Joe, we might as well go to the metaphorical gulags because our views and opinions are about as popular culture as goodness only knows what? Are we just dinosaurs that aren't getting on the inclusion bandwagon?
I mean, that's the thing I find quite funny because it's actually a terribly regressive ideology. I mean, to suggest that we've each got an internal sense of a gendered soul, if you like, an idea of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman that doesn't correspond with our biological sex, that's incredibly limiting. That's based on really sexist stereotypes. So actually, what is being pushed is a really backward, sexist, homophobic ideology. So I think they'll have egg on their face in a few years' time, to be honest, when the wheels start to fall off.
Well, we'll see, and I'm sure that you, Josephine, will be chronicling all of that. But that was the columnist and writer, Joe Bartosh. Thank you very much for your time today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we're going to be discussing the Captain Tom Moore Foundation, which is being investigated by the Charity Commission. Has the legacy of a national hero, let's be honest, been tainted? But first, here's a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Just after 2:30, here's the latest. The Foreign Office says it condemns the exploitation of prisoners of war and civilians for political purposes. It's after Russian state media claimed 2 more British men have been charged with carrying out mercenary activities by a Moscow-backed separatist region in Ukraine. Aid worker Dylan Healy and military volunteer Andrew Hill are believed to be held in the self-styled Donetsk People's Republic. That's according to Russian news agency TASS. However, there's been no independent verification of the charges. The Prime Minister is facing questions over why he delayed suspending the MP Chris Pincher from the Conservatives following allegations of sexual misconduct. Mr Pincher is being investigated by Parliament's watchdog after being accused of groping 2 men at a private members' club. Boris Johnson resisted calls to act until the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme launched an investigation after receiving a formal complaint. Online searches for bowel cancer symptoms on the NHS website have gone up tenfold. That's following the death of Dame Deborah James this week. There were 23,000 hits the day after Dame Deborah died on Tuesday, up from 2,000 the day before. The podcaster and campaigner passed away after a 5-year battle with the disease. And pride parades are taking place across the UK today. Crowds wearing face paint, glitter, jewels and sequins are taking part in Pride in London this afternoon. It's the first since the outbreak of the pandemic. More than 1 million people are expected to descend on the city for the parade, marking the 50th anniversary of the UK's first ever Pride Parade. On TV, online and on DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere because Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, you might remember at the height of the COVID hysteria that the nation donated more than 30 million quid to a World War II veteran who was raising cash, laudably, for the National Health Service. It was given, of course, in good faith. But was it given recklessly? The Captain Tom Foundation is now under investigation by the Charity Commission after it was revealed that a company controlled by the late Second World War veteran's family trademarked his name and reportedly made £800,000. The watchdog is also exploring alleged mismanagement and misconduct in the trustees' decision-making and the charity's governance. Well, joining me to discuss this is the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie. Kelvin, cheers very much for your time. What's been going on at this foundation? Do you think, is this just all a storm in a teacup, or do you think there's something going on here?
Well, I think there were some aspects of it which I think you could probably say were wholly charitable, and it was a mistake by the family, who allegedly didn't understand all the rules connected with the governance of a charity. However, to actually trademark quietly and without anything to do with the charity itself, the name Tom Moore. And I can remember having my eyebrow raised slightly by seeing that they were selling Captain Tom Moore gin at £100 a bottle. And I should imagine what most people would have thought was, well, that's fine. The excess over, say, a £35 bottle of gin would all go to the charity. Well, what's quite clear is that the trademark aspect was being bought by people who were then commercialising the name Moore. Now, they're entitled to commercialise it if they've paid for a trademark. The problem is that it's quite clear that there was a business orientation, right, allegedly, allegedly, which had nothing whatsoever to do with the charity itself, but had everything to do with the Moore family. And two of the people involved in that who appeared to benefit from it through the trademarked company were Tom Moore's daughter, who I understand is very, very upset about all these allegations. I think it would be much easier if she did a Prince Andrew and went on Newsnight and just talked through what the issues were. And also the husband. And it's and the husband, who is a businessman and is clearly no fool, and the family have done good stuff, right? Nobody's accusing them of anything right now. But to be actually faced as many investigations by the Charity Commission as they have done, there only appears to be a no smoke without fire aspect to the charitable foundation.
And I guess for viewers watching this, Kelvin, a lot of people will be saying, and I know anecdotally many members of my family will be of this view as well, which is all of these charities, right? Can we trust them, Kelvin? That's what they'll be saying.
Right. I think that is the perfect point. That is the perfect point. Actually, I only give my money to people who I know something about and recognise that there's a solid foundation to it. Almost everybody in the world, I don't know whether you've ever noticed, when you go on the media and you see somebody quoted and what their job was, they appear to work for a charity. I don't know how many people now work for charities. And sometimes I wonder, this is not entirely true. I mean, we've just had Dame Deborah James. What a fantastic woman she was.
Yeah.
Right, prepared to talk in the most intimate detail about the thing that was killing her. Unbelievable, unbelievable. But there are other aspects sometimes where you think to yourself, do you know what? I think this charity has been set up as a make employment project, therefore make pay project by somebody. And I know that's unreasonable, but to be honest, the biggest explosion in business in this country in the last 25 years must be in charitable projects.
Yeah, because, I mean, Captain Tom, right, I remember during those days of lockdown, right, he was a real source of national pride, right? We all sort of channelled through him as a vehicle our pride at, one, being British, and two, the stoicism that the nation had showed during the start of the pandemic and the NHS's response to it. But is this at risk of damaging the legacy of the man himself because of the actions?
Well, no, I don't agree with that.
No?
No, I don't agree with that. I think Tom Moore led a phenomenal life.
Yeah.
And his last actions on this earth were an inspiration to everybody, especially to me. Okay? So I don't agree with that. What I do think is that the family itself owe us all an obligation. Yeah, it's true, by the way, that money, that 30-odd million quid, that is secured. I don't worry about that so much. I'd like an explanation, particularly from the son-in-law, why he felt it necessary to set up a company that privately trademarked the Tom Moore's name, and which the turnover was 800,000, but the profit was still £500,000. I don't know about you, but when I last looked down the back of my sofa, I did not see £500,000. I think these are public questions that have been aired, by the way, brilliantly by the Times. Great investigation. Without the Times on this issue, we'd know nothing about it. I think the family owe us a proper sit down to say, we promise you we didn't touch the 30-odd million. The trademark issue was a mistake on our part. And what we're going to do is we're going to give all of that money as well over. If they did that, then I think they can hold their head up higher. Unfortunately, if they don't do that and they carry on saying what they're saying at the moment, which is we are cooperating with the Charity Commission, I bet they are. I bet they're cooperating. I think unless they say that, then whenever they walk down the high street, their local high street, then I honestly think people may not be very kind towards them.
I mean, there was a lot of government COVID waste as well, wasn't there, on things like PPE, for example. A lot of it went up literally in smoke because we had to burn it. Was there something about the pandemic that you think actually led to a lack of scrutiny of these things, of areas like this, whether it be charitable organisations and all the rest of it? Was it just a mad rush to spend money?
Right. Well, there's certainly an aspect of, look, I think with the PPE, that was different. We were clearly caught short and we needed desperately to get hold of these masks and the like. Actually, I mean, of course, there'll be a lot of your viewers who actually would say the masks are a complete waste of time. In fact, there's quite a few medical experts who think so too. But look, we needed that PPE. We needed it for the nurses. And therefore, writing cheques left, right and centre to people that you knew, oh, Tom, he was a former MP, he'll do us right. Right. I do understand that. I do understand that, because had people died because there was a lack of PPE, the scandal would be even larger than just the money. However, there was a chuck away Charlie aspect to the COVID, which I think we're still suffering from. After all, one way and another, the furlough and the bounce back loans are the biggest rackets in history. I have friends of mine who, because they didn't go to work, at the end of doing no work for 18 months, boom, because they didn't travel to work, I commute from where they lived into London, right, they had more money in the bank than they did when they started, and they hadn't produced one single thing in that time. So there is an aspect. So when we look around today, why are we skinned? Why has this gone wrong? Why have our taxes going on? By the way, don't even think about it. Look at bounce back loans, the biggest sense of criminality in history probably, and look at furlough and you'll probably have the answer.
Well, Kelvin, I do think there's an element of, well, what did you expect to happen, right? When politicians cry about the state of inflation in this country, well, you know, if you print money like you wouldn't believe, like it's going out of fashion, of course you're going to cause inflation, right? That's
if you
basic
print
economics.
money without productivity, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to 10% inflation and possibly going higher. Absolutely. But do you know what? Nobody cared, because what they said was, if we don't give the money away, then we'll have rioting on the streets and God knows what, right? Well, next time we will know. Next time, do not do it like that. The bounce back loans was criminality from beginning to end. The number of new cars, the number of new kitchens, the amount of painting and decorating done, the whole thing a complete racket.
Well, we'll leave it there, Kelvin, but cheers very much for your company. That was the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie there. Now, folks, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to announce curbs on online gambling, including maximum stakes of between £2 and £5 for online casinos. There's going to be a ban on free bets and a non-intrusive affordability check in an effort to stem what he calls the catastrophic impact of addiction on people's lives. The government is also hoping to reach an agreement with the Premier League clubs on reducing the number of them that are actually sponsored by gambling companies. So telling us more and to give us his thoughts on the proposals is the Head of Lifestyle Economics at the Institute for Economic Affairs, Christopher Snowden. Hi, Christopher. Do these proposals, in your eyes, go far enough? Are they too punitive, potentially, on the gambling industry? I certainly know your view, Chris, but just tell me, why is it that politicians feel absolutely comfortable to intrude in this area of our lives? Is this nanny statism gone mad?
A lot of people just don't like gambling, you know, and the anti-gambling coalition that formed around the fixed odds betting terminal issue has got the wind in its sails. So they've been demanding various things, including, you know, like a limit on how much you can gamble every month, as well as these affordability checks, which in principle aren't that bad an idea, and advertising bans and sponsorship bans and slowing down the games online and all that kind of stuff. And from what we've heard and from what we've just said, it sounds like we might be getting roughly half of that. It doesn't look like we're going to have a ban on sponsorship, which would be great, particularly for, you know, sports like darts and snooker, rugby league, you know, less popular sports than the Premier League. And also there's this affordability check thing, which we haven't got many details about, other than it's not going to be obtrusive. And I'm not sure how that would work. Most people's only experience with an affordability check would be when they buy a house and you've got to provide bank statements and all that kind of stuff, which is fairly obtrusive. but it's difficult to see how you can prove that you can afford to do anything without showing details like bank statements.
So, Chris, without meaning to sound, and we've spoken about this before, there's got to be a halfway house here, isn't there, between your position and the government's position in saying, look, if you cannot afford to do it, right, gambling away your life savings or whatever you've got in your bank balance isn't a sensible thing to do. But if I or any of my viewers think, well, I fancy a little flutter, you know, it might be on the horses, it might be on whatever, they should be able to do so in a free society.
Yeah, I don't really see much call for affordability checks at all. I think some of the kind of nudge style not policies, but kind of ideas and features, I guess, that you call them in online gambling, where you can set a limit in advance. I think that's a pretty reasonable idea. You know, it's not illiberal. And, you know, obviously there are problem gamblers out there and they need things to kind of constrain themselves. But the number of problem gamblers, you know, it's 0.2% of the population. It's a really, really small number. And I don't see why everybody who wants to have a flutter should have to provide various intimate details of their lives. You don't have to do it in any other market, right? Other than, you know, maybe, as I say, the mortgage market. You know, people can go into a Ferrari showroom, buy a car. No one's going to ask them whether they can actually afford it. I can buy thousands of pounds of shares in a few seconds on my phone. And again, no one asks if I can afford it, other than, you know, knowing that I've got the money in the bank. So it's not obvious to me why gambling is such a special case that we need to have this unprecedented measure.
Do you think there's an element of, and I don't mean to sound like a Marxist here, Chris, and you know, I might make you blush here, but I'm wondering, do you think there's an element of sneering in as far as the football rules are concerned? Because football, you know, unless it's Chelsea, for example, is seen as, we've just had, for my radio listeners, Newcastle United on screen there. Is there a sort of sneering at working class people? Oh, God, they can't possibly be trusted, Chris, to make a bet because they may well get carried away.
I don't know if that's such a big part of it. I mean, they're certainly sneering at the kind of gambling that, you know, working class people want to do. And you've had this assault on betting shops for several years now because certain middle class people just think there's too many betting shops. Well, again, it's not really down to them. You know, if they've got the footfall and people want to go in them, then we should have as many betting shops as the market can stand. Of course, thousands of them are now going out of business because of this whole fixed odds betting terminal issue. So I'm not sure if there's snobbery directly when it comes to the sponsorship. I think just people who don't like gambling want to tackle it from every angle. And if that means going after all the advertising, going after all the sponsorship, they don't care what kind of sport it is. They just don't want to see any evidence of gambling being around. They can't ban it themselves, but they can ban every trace of it, every visible trace of it. They can push bookies back into the side streets. They can get rid of the ads. They can get rid of the sponsorship, and they'll feel a little bit better about themselves. But of course, it doesn't do any good whatsoever. There is literally no evidence that gambling sponsorship has any relationship to problem gambling whatsoever.
All right, Christopher Snowdon there giving me his views. Thank you very much. Chris Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs there, discussing the government's proposed curbs on online gambling. Now, folks, moving on. British universities could be forced to reduce the number of UK students they admit as the real value of tuition fees plummets. The Russell Group of universities claim institutions are making a loss of £1,750 a year on each home student, because tuition fees have remained almost static for 10 years and have not kept pace with inflation. Experts claim that some universities might be forced to focus entirely on teaching postgraduates and international students whose fees aren't capped at all. Well, joining me now are university students Jess Gill and Anna McGovern. Jess, can I start with you? Would it be morally wrong for universities to turn away home students purely for financial reasons? Is this just universities seeking to make a quick buck?
Well, Darren, I think we have to address how we've got into this situation on why a lot of students aren't paying back their loans. And it's because of the fast-tracking into education, into university, when there's so many other options. I don't think it's useful. Like, my brother had a degree in IT at Sporting University. He's now a train driver. My sister in media, she now wants to property develop. You know, that's not related to these degrees. And I think we're lowering productivity by encouraging students without considering alternative options like apprenticeships. we're encouraging them to go into universities without thinking. And I think university is valuable for doctors, for lawyers, but I think students need to consider it. And I don't like the culture that you have to be 18 and go to university. I think you need to consider it, and I think you need to have more financial responsibility with that.
Yeah. Anna, do you agree with what Jess has just said there? Because in my opinion, right, if we get rid of more of these Mickey Mouse degrees, as they're called, the sort of finger painting for diversity or whatever university course they're going to come up with next, do you not think that's the solution, instead of focusing on turning away British students, for example?
Yes, I agree with many of the points that Jess brings up. I think that too many young people, when they finish education, are now actually going to university, when not actually considering the other options that are available to them, because there are many other fantastic schemes that are available, because the value of a university degree has actually declined. Now anyone can basically finish education and then go straight to university. You don't even need to have good grades nowadays. You can start with a foundation course if you didn't get the grades you need, and then go straight to university on an undergraduate degree, which means that with universities who take all these students on, it means that they have to spend more money and they won't be able to afford it. So I genuinely think that if you actually make it harder for people to be able to access university, but then have more options available to people as well, post-education and post when they finish their exams, I think that'd be really beneficial to everyone.
Yeah. Jess, do you think actually the government, in order to actually advocate people move away from degrees, how can they actually go about that, when it seems to me these days you need an undergraduate degree and a postgraduate degree just to be even seen by your CV, right? Is that not the fear?
Well, I think a lot of jobs, the government is promoting apprenticeships at the moment. Personally, my view is to leave it up to the market completely, because then we lead to more unproductivity and there's more gaps in the market. But for example, I know somebody who did music for 3 years at university. Now they're working as a manager in a supermarket, which is a good job, but it doesn't need that degree, and we're getting rid of 3 years of someone's work life for them to basically indulge in this culture, which a lot of students do, of hookup culture, of drug use. You know, we always talk about woke students at university because of their teachers, but the whole culture towards university isn't conservative at all.
Right, we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, but that's the university students Jess Gill and Anna McGovern before her there giving her opinion. Now, folks, you're watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Please don't go anywhere. We'll be back straight after the weather with more Real Britain.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be showery for many, with the heaviest and most frequent rain across Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and after a pretty wet morning for some due to a front passing through, you can expect showers to end the day. In the southeast, that front will be moving across, but it has broken up somewhat, so many will just see some showery rain for a time. Across Wales, we can expect further showers, perhaps a few heavy ones too. They'll start to ease as we go through the evening and especially overnight. There'll also be showers across the West Midlands as we go through the evening. They should be fairly scattered, so there'll be some drier and perhaps brighter breaks in between. It looks like there'll be fewer showers around the northeast, but still a few though, so although it's looking mostly dry here, don't rule out some rain at times. A wet picture across much of Scotland. Here the showers are likely to merge into longer spells of rain, especially across western parts with the risk of some thunder. A scattering of showers for Northern Ireland as well. Some heavy ones are likely in the east at first, then there may be a drier spell for a time. Further showery rain is expected overnight, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst England and Wales should be drier. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Hello and welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. In this hour, we'll be discussing the abortion debate and free speech in the UK, cutting food tariffs, a post-Brexit opportunity, and why the report into Meghan Markle's alleged bullying is being kept secret. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's just after 3. Here's the latest news. The Foreign Office says it condemns the exploitation of prisoners of war and civilians for political purposes. It's after Russian state media claimed 2 more British men have been charged with carrying out mercenary activities by a Moscow-backed separatist region in Ukraine. 22-year-old aid worker Dylan Healy and military volunteer Andrew Hill are believed to be held in the self-styled Donetsk People's Republic, as according to Russian news agency TASS. However, there's been no independent verification of the charges. Last month, British fighters Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were sentenced to death for the same charge in the region. The Prime Minister is facing questions over his delay in suspending the Tory whip from MP Chris Pincher following allegations of sexual misconduct. Mr Pincher's being investigated by Parliament's watchdog after being accused of groping 2 men at a private members' club while drunk on Wednesday. Boris Johnson resisted calls to act until the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme launched an investigation after receiving a complaint. Mr Johnson is said to be troubled by the allegations. Luke Pollard, Shadow Minister for the Armed Forces, says the situation has been handled poorly.
Politics really should reflect the best of our values as a country, and I'm afraid what we're seeing at the moment is yet another Conservative MP after Conservative MP doing something utterly appalling and seemingly being protected by Downing Street. If the Prime Minister had an ounce of decency, he would have withdrawn the whip immediately, not waited to see if he could sit it out to reward this arch-loyalist with that little bit more protection. I'm afraid it really stinks.
Some international news, and a major search and rescue operation is underway near Hong Kong after a ship snapped in 2 and sank during a severe tropical storm. The Hong Kong government flying service released footage of a crew member being winched to safety just seconds before the vessel was overcome by waves. Authorities say 30 people were on board and 3 have been rescued so far. Internet searches for bowel cancer symptoms on the NHS website have gone up tenfold following the death of Dame Deborah James this week. Health Service figures show there were 23,000 hits the day after Dame Deborah died on Tuesday. That's up from 2,000 the day before. The podcaster and health campaigner passed away after a 5-year battle with the disease. The Royal College of Nursing is calling for its members to be fully involved in the government's inquiry into the COVID pandemic. It follows claims that staff were left at risk without proper guidance, effective testing or protective equipment. Meanwhile, the Office for National Statistics says weekly UK infections have gone up by more than 500,000, with 2.3 million recorded recently. That's the highest estimate since late April. Azim Majid, Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College, says two factors are behind the increase.
One is people are mixing much more now. The summer people are socialising with each other, going to events, parties and so on. The second factor, which is probably more important, is we're facing new subvariants of Omicron, what are known as BA4 and BA5, which are highly infectious, which spread very easily. And so these new subvariants are really driving the numbers up in the UK and in many other countries as well.
British drivers were handed a record 8.6 million parking tickets for leaving their cars in places like shopping centres and service stations. The DVLA says an average of 23,000 tickets were issued every day from April 2021 to March of this year. The government's Levelling Up department says it's determined to end rip-off parking practices. And former Rangers and Scotland goalkeeper Andy Gorham has died at the age of 58. Gorham revealed in May that he had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Issuing a statement this afternoon, Rangers paid tribute to the legendary goalkeeper. He made 260 appearances for the club between 1991 and 1998, winning 5 league titles and multiple trophies. He also won 43 caps for Scotland. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Here's what's coming up over the next hour. COVID cases are rising to one of their highest levels since the pandemic began. But do we really have anything to worry about? And are MPs in the UK free to speak their mind on issues like abortion, especially if they're a man? We're going to have that debate after Danny Kruger MP was shouted down in Westminster. And Halifax Bank has told customers who don't like being made to declare their pronouns on their badges that they should close their accounts. Well, when will this woke authoritarianism end? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. As ever, though, I would love to know your thoughts on Scotland signing away sovereignty by the EU if it leaves the United Kingdom. It's inconsistent, if you ask me, folks. Tweet me at GBNews or email me on gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can watch us online too on YouTube, and don't forget Facebook. Loads and loads of cracking content on our page. Thank you very much. But first, on to that issue, on to that question. Are we free to speak our minds in the United Kingdom on abortion, especially if you're a man? Danny Kruger MP, one of a tiny number of British MPs to express pro-life views since the US Supreme Court's recent decision on Roe versus Wade, I'm not so sure that you can voice that opinion. After revealing his views in the Commons earlier this week, he said in a statement this morning, "My remarks in the Commons have triggered an avalanche of abuse and misrepresentation online that is sadly redolent of the debate that has polarised the US for decades." He goes on to say, "I accept that MPs must take care to avoid being misunderstood on such a controversial and emotive issue. But I hope we can still allow the free expression of opinions, not least in Parliament, and a fair hearing for one another." The pro-life cause is clearly much weaker here in the UK than it is in the US. It's not as contentious of an issue. But does and should Danny Kruger MP and others have a right to express their views on abortion openly in British politics? That's our debate today. Joining me now to discuss that is Madeleine Page, of the CEO of the Alliance of Pro-Life Students, and the author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. Madeleine, can I start with you, please? How do you actually respond to Danny Kruger's statement there, where he's saying, look, I hope we're still a country in which you can have free speech, especially in our elected parliament?
I think it's brilliant. I'm really glad that he had the confidence to say something. And unfortunately, as you say, I think, he did so knowing he was going to get backlash. This isn't the first time that this has happened, especially being a man speaking on abortion, which makes no sense because truth is truth, no matter who says it. So I'm really pleased that he said something for sure.
Do you think this will encourage others to give their opinion? They may well be one or two ministers, for example, around the cabinet table who think, actually, I agree with him. Or do you think, as I assume Amy might well say in a minute, that this is just a view that is exclusively found within a very small minority of people?
It's definitely not exclusively found in a small minority of people. 70% of women in the UK do want to see a reduction in our abortion law time limit, which is currently very high. So I don't think that he's actually in the minority in that sense. Whether it will encourage more people to speak out or not, I'm not sure. I'd like to think that it will inspire more people, but also the backlash that he's received and the horrendous abuse that he's got online, I think will make a lot of people want to not say anything for fear of something they may receive themselves.
Amy, putting aside your view on being pro-choice, do you actually think there is a problem that we've identified here where someone like Danny Kruger can't give his opinion? Or do you think it's exclusively right, actually, that this should be a women-only debate?
I think the problem here is that it's a politician having a say on what should or shouldn't go on in a woman's body, and that isn't the decision of politicians. That's a healthcare choice. That's an individual healthcare choice between a woman and her doctor. And this is what we've seen in America. It's a very slippery slope where when politicians start getting involved in this type of thing, we've seen what can happen. And I think when people heard Danny Kruger say what he said, they got alarm bells that a similar situation could unfold in the UK as to what we've seen in America, which instills, rightly so, fear in the hearts of most women in the country.
Yeah, Madeleine, I'm wondering then, how do you think we can get to a point as a society where, because I don't know if you saw this, both of you actually, but Prue Leith, who is Danny Kruger's mother, the famous baker, and she's world-renowned, she actually wrote a piece in The Spectator saying she herself, they weren't her comments, and she's pro-choice. She herself was hounded online for the comments her son made. I'm wondering, Madeleine, does this not tell us about the really toxic atmosphere out there, where if you say something that goes against the Twitter grain, then hell hath no fury, like Twitter scorned?
Absolutely. And I think especially if it's on a topic like abortion and you're a man and you have the wrong opinion. I mean, just a few days ago, Prince Harry was being celebrated for his opinion on abortion because he had what Twitter think is, the right opinion. So he's a man with an opinion on abortion that is considered the correct one. So we celebrate him. But someone like Danny Kruger has the incorrect opinion, and so we just slander him as much as possible.
Amy?
I think the reason that people would say that that is the incorrect opinion is because you can't be pro-life. If you're pro-life, you're either pro-forced birth or pro-making the procedure extremely unsafe for women and endangering women, and also alienating a lot of women from being able to access an abortion because they haven't got the finances to travel. So there isn't such thing as pro-life, and I think that's why it's an untenable position to take.
Amy, yeah, there will be some people watching this who disagree with that point of view. But the point is, though, do you think that and I mentioned the hounding of Prue Leith, Danny Kruger's mother there, do you think people should ultimately be allowed to express what they would call pro-life views?
Of course they should be allowed to express whatever they like. It's free speech. But I also think equally they shouldn't be surprised when they're greeted with very valid criticism, potentially from women who have experienced this issue firsthand. And I think that's why people have a problem with men getting involved, because this can't happen in your body. So you will never know the pain and the absolute disarray of being faced with the reality that something's invaded your body, essentially, and you are very limited in your options, and it's an extremely trapping place to be. And I think that's why people get frustrated when men enter the argument.
So, Madeline, then, where do we draw the line here, then, between genuine disagreement and a hounding of a certain opinion to a point where someone feels they may lose their livelihood, their income, their goodness only knows what? You know, Danny Kruger, I doubt, will be rushing to tweet anytime soon.
I think it comes down to the content of the debate itself. If we're criticising arguments, then that's great, and that's what healthy debate should be. But when we're criticising an individual purely because of their genitalia, that doesn't make any sense. So in terms of what Amy was saying, you know, if we look at Danny Kruger's actual comments in Parliament, what he said was true. It is a different body. The unborn child, the fetus, is not an invasion inside a woman. That is where an unborn child is supposed to be. So we can't start saying that they've invaded it or anything like that. And if we look at his actual comments, they're completely in line with science. It's got different DNA to the mother. It's a unique human being. And that's the heart of the argument.
Amy,
Cancer cells have a unique DNA. They also welcome to hang around inside your body. The baby, the fetus, the embryo can't survive without the mother. It is very much an invasion of her body at that age.
6-month-old baby. So
Amy, before I let you continue that particular discussion, can I just ask you, Amy, do you think that you have to be of a certain group in order to speak on issues relating to that group? So, for example, you've got to be a woman to speak on abortion. For example, you've got to be a gay man to speak on Pride today, maybe in London. For example, you've got to be a trans person to speak about trans issues. You've got to be a black and minority ethnic person to speak on issues relating to certain communities. How do you actually go about enforcing that? Do you think that's the way it should be? Because that strikes me the direction that we're heading in, or the argument that's being made here.
No, of course not. But it always helps to have a person who's affected by the issue in the room. Like when we talk about trans people, we need to have a trans voice involved in that conversation. I think the reason people at the moment want to limit what men have to say on this topic is because words like what Danny Kruger said yesterday, they're harming women. In America, in 13 states, women will die because of what decision has been made. So that's why we want to maybe clamp down on who's involved and what's being said, and actually look at the real life consequences of these words and these actions, because they're affecting women solely. So of course we need to listen to women first.
So Madeline, would you agree with that then? Do you think it's right for those that, and we hear a lot, don't we, the watchword of the moment is lived experience. Do you have to have lived experience in order to have a view on these issues? I mean, anecdotally, someone very, very close to me in my family, we lost what would have been a little girl, my sister, and that informed my view, and it's I understand, a deeply emotive view. I'll never, ever forget watching my mother break her heart at the loss of what would have been her child. Can I not talk about that, is what I'm asking you today.
I think in this day and age, unfortunately, lived experience and feeling seems to be what's given weight. But I think there needs to be place for both. I think we need to look at the people behind the issue, absolutely, but also the arguments themselves have merit. And we need to look at what is actually being said. Is it true? Does it make sense? Does abortion end the life of an innocent human being? Science would say yes. And therefore, that's a whole other area that we also need to look at. And in terms of only allowing women to speak on this issue, it takes two to create a child. You know, Danny Kruger is capable of creating life. And in fact, we need men in order to get pregnant in the first place. So to completely cut them out of the argument makes zero sense.
Amy,
but I think if you want to talk about things that are true related to this topic at the moment. 11-year-olds are being forced to carry children to term and give birth to them. Victims of incest are being forced to carry children to term. Children are dying in the womb, and then people are having to give birth to them at the end of the pregnancy. This is not right. And if you want to talk about the reason why this issue is so crucial, that we hang on to the argument as we have it here, and we don't follow what's happened in America in any way, or even entertain, which is what Danny Kruger was doing. He was entertaining the idea that what's happened in America could happen here. And that is just barbaric and out of the question.
So, Amy, is it your view then, and you touched on this earlier, but is it your view that the decision, the issue of abortion in general, on rights and limits and all the rest of it, that shouldn't be in the hands of politicians?
No, it's completely a reproductive right. It's a healthcare issue. But there's so many different circumstances and scenarios that lead to a woman as a last resort needing to seek an abortion. And it's certainly not the decision of a politician whether she can have control over what is growing and depending on her body for survival.
Madeleine, that final question to you.
It should be. Our laws and our morality are heavily linked. Our laws are there to protect the vulnerable. Unborn children, I think, are clearly the most vulnerable, especially if we look at the millions of abortions that have happened in the UK since the law began about 50 years ago. And a good society, a healthy society, protects the most vulnerable. We don't just shove them to the side. So we need our laws to do that, and our politicians are those that project that for us.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but sorry, Amy, we are going to have to leave it there. But I want to thank you both for a very civil discussion on a very emotive issue that tugs on the heartstrings of both sides of the argument. So thank you very much to Madeleine Page there and Amy Nickel before that. Joining me, of course, to discuss the MP Danny Kruger's comments on abortion rights. Now, folks, there's plenty more to come this afternoon on Real Britain. Next, we're going to be discussing the COVID case rise, and I'll speak to one expert who says, calm down, dear. Don't get too worried. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be showery for many, with the heaviest and most frequent rain across Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and after a pretty wet morning for some due to a front passing through, you can expect showers to end the day. In the southeast, that front will be moving across, but it has broken up somewhat, so many will just see some showery rain for a time. Across Wales, we can expect further showers, perhaps a few heavy ones too. They'll start to ease as we go through the evening and especially overnight. There'll also be showers across the West Midlands as we go through the evening. They should be fairly scattered, so there'll be some drier and perhaps brighter breaks in between. It looks like there'll be fewer showers around the northeast, but still a few though, so although it's looking mostly dry here, don't rule out some rain at times. A wet picture across much of Scotland. Here the showers are likely to merge into longer spells of rain, especially across western parts with the risk of some thunder. A scattering of showers for Northern Ireland as well. Some heavy ones are likely in the east at first, then there may be a drier spell for a time. Further showery rain is expected overnight, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst England and Wales should be drier. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, folks, I'm really sorry if you never want to hear about COVID ever again. But COVID cases are approaching record high levels again and are set to rise even higher as the festival season is upon us. Scientists have claimed 1 in 21 people in the UK currently have the virus, and the spread is more prevalent among the under 18s. But are hospitalisations rising too, and should we be worried? Well, joining me to set out the facts is the statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, I'll start off with that really obvious question then. Should we be concerned, right? Should we be scrambling for our face masks and locking ourselves in our homes once again?
Yeah, afternoon, Darren. I think some people would be calling for that, but I think let's take a closer look at what's happening at the moment. So these infection numbers that we get, and we have been seeing them rise the last month, they come from the Office for National Statistics, and it's basically a random survey of households. They test people, and then you can kind of extrapolate how many people in the population have probably got COVID overall. And we have seen this rise over the last 4 weeks, and I think it's been driven by kind of the subvariants of Omicron. So remember last December, Omicron hit the country. We saw these mass rise infections, but it was much, much less deadly variant. So we didn't see the kind of corresponding kind of serious illness as what we had there. So it's BA4 and BA5. These are these subvariants, Darren. Now, one of the things with the pandemic is we can look at other countries and see what's been going on there. So they were first identified in South Africa, and Portugal about a month or so back also had the highest cases in Europe. Again, both driven by these new variants, but both saw a rise in cases. They rose for about 4 or 5 weeks, and then they've come back down again. Now, the important thing is you talked about, should we have new restrictions? Should we have masks? Should we do different things like what we've done in the past? And if you look at Portugal, one of our closest neighbours in Europe, they brought no new restrictions in. The cases went up and they've come back down without any intervention. So if we follow the course of what's happening in South Africa and Portugal without any new interventions, we should potentially be seeing this pass in the next couple of weeks, reaching the peak, that is.
What do you think then, Jamie, of Nicola Sturgeon telling the Scottish people to start wearing face masks indoors again? Is this just a step too far?
Well, I think for Nicola Sturgeon, it's a bit richer saying wear masks indoors when obviously she was warned by the police for not wearing masks herself. So I think when it comes to these politicians, the behaviour of the public and asking them to do certain things, you need to practice what you preach. And the evidence on masks overall is pretty divisive in terms of the effectiveness, because the vast majority of people who are wearing masks in public spaces, indoors, on trains, on things, they're not really wearing these medical grade masks which will properly protect you. So I think Scotland does have the highest infection rates in the country, but I think, when you're just counting numbers of people who've got COVID, people start going and thinking back to the early days where the hospitals were being overrun and people were saying that, everything was going to be carnage and then lots of deaths. But if you actually look at these new variants, they are far less deadly than what, say, I would have been talking to you a couple of years ago. If we look at the more important metrics of, say, the number of patients in critical care beds, it's about 70 patients across all of England out of 4,180 beds. And that's a quarter of what it was this time last year. So even though infections are significantly higher, the number of patients seriously in hospital is much, much lower. And remember, when you see people talking and you pick up a newspaper, they'll say high numbers of people being admitted to hospital with COVID. Around 2/3 of people who actually go into hospital with COVID aren't actually being treated because of it. They might have had a broken leg, they've gone in for some other treatment, but they do test these people all the time as well. So I would urge some caution, not have any alarm. And if we follow what we're seeing in other parts of the world, we can ride this one out over the next few weeks.
So my viewers watching this thinking, oh my word, not another one. Do you think actually those who are actively trying to keep COVID in the news and keep a degree of fear around it, do you think ultimately they won't get what they want, which, let's be honest, would be further restrictions, Jamie?
Well, I think politically it's more difficult, Darren, now, because if you remember back in December, there were calls for further restrictions and the cabinet was divisive at the time in terms of what they should do. Michael Gove came out a few months after and said he got it wrong. He was pushing for more restrictions and Boris didn't go for that. He hasn't got the very goodwill with the backbenchers, in the Tory party. So trying to get any legislation through Parliament for any further restrictions, I think, is nigh on impossible for Boris Johnson. Now, Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford may look at it slightly differently in the devolved nations, but again, it's going to be difficult to bring something there when you're not going to have the things in England. And just remember what I just said, Portugal done absolutely nothing, South Africa's done nothing, they've brought nothing new in, cases have gone up and they've naturally come back down as you kind of that trajectory that you normally see through these different waves.
Yeah, I mean, Jamie, I've had a lot to criticise Boris Johnson over recent times, but actually what he did there, I think, was brilliant, and I was so grateful for him for saying, no, we've got to stay the course, see this through, and ultimately he was proven right on actually rolling back those draconian lockdown measures and restrictions. But the statistician there that always shines a light on the actual data and not just the fear rhetoric around it, Jamie Jenkins, thank you very much for joining me today. Now, folks, you're with GB News on telly and DAB radio. Next, we're going to be asking, though, should Buckingham Palace make Meghan bullying investigation claims, Meghan Markle, that is, public? It's time for a check on the news headlines, though, before we get on to that. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. Just after 3:30, here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Foreign Office says it condemns the exploitation of prisoners of war and civilians for political purposes. It's after Russian state media claimed that 2 more British men have been charged with carrying out mercenary activities by a Moscow-backed separatist region in Ukraine. Aid worker Dylan Healy and military volunteer Andrew Hill are believed to be held in the self-styled Donetsk People's Republic. That's according to Russian news agency TASS. However, there's been no independent verification of the charges. The Prime Minister is facing questions over why he delayed suspending the MP Chris Pincher from the Conservatives following allegations of sexual misconduct. Mr Pincher is being investigated by Parliament's watchdog after being accused of groping 2 men at a private members' club. Boris Johnson resisted calls to act until the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme launched an investigation after receiving a formal complaint. A leading animal charity has warned they are no longer accepting sick seabirds due to the risk of avian flu. Latest DEFRA figures have confirmed 102 cases of bird flu in England, with 2 cases each in Wales and Scotland earlier this year. There are currently 7 disease control zones in England. The RSPCA says it will try to respond to calls about sick birds where possible and deal with them appropriately. And pride parades are taking place across the UK today. Crowds wearing face paint, glitter, jewels and sequins are taking part in Pride in London this afternoon. It's the first since the outbreak of the pandemic. More than 1 million people expected to descend on the city for the parade, marking the 50th anniversary of the UK's first such Pride parade. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Darren will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Now, before you think I'm doing a Del Boy, I want to ask you, would you like 10% off bananas, olives and orange juice to help you with the cost of living crisis? Well, the government has hinted this week the food tariffs will be reduced or even removed altogether on some products that are not farmed or produced here in Britain. A small token gesture or a meaningful tax cut that we can get used to thanks to Brexit? Well, here to enlighten us further on this very issue is Victoria Hewson, who is the Head of Regulatory Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Victoria, this ultimately, is it going to be too little too late, or do you think actually this is going to be a meaningful difference to my viewers' weekly food bills?
Well, I'm afraid the story, as it was published in I think it was the Times carried the story last week, sort of made it out to be more than it is. I would certainly welcome unilaterally cutting tariffs on food, and not just on food that we don't produce. We should not be still maintaining high tariff walls to protect our farmers from international competition at the expense of consumers, especially at this time of high inflation. It seems to me to be completely unethical. But I think the story as it was set out was that Boris Johnson was actually trying to get lots of countries to agree to do it rather than just going ahead and doing the right thing ourselves. And then furthermore, there was also some suggestion that our Department of International Trade thought the whole thing was just going to be too complicated and there would be legal difficulties. And, we should maybe probably just not bother at all. Now, a lot of people say we shouldn't bother at all because the tariffs on food are not that significant and they don't really make that much difference. To which I always think, well, why have we got them then? If they don't make much difference in terms of deterring imports to this country from other countries, why have we got them? They must make a difference. Otherwise, our farmers wouldn't desperately want to keep them, and our trading partners in other countries wouldn't be actively trying to get us to remove them.
So before we all go bananas, Victoria, is this a temporary move? Or do you think this is the government moving in a direction where actually it starts to say we need to make the most of the opportunities that Brexit allows us to exploit?
Well, I think it was suggested that it might be a temporary move for the duration of this period of high inflation. That's not a very good way to go about trade policy. If you're dialing up and down your tariffs every so often, that doesn't set the sort of atmosphere of stability and certainty that is quite important for international trade. And, in terms of seizing the opportunities, we did actually reduce our tariffs when we left the EU. Our tariffs across the board are now quite materially lower than under the EU's common external tariffs. That was quite promising. Unfortunately, we have held off going for much deeper tariffs and tariff cuts. And unfortunately, even worse, we are still doing things like imposing high tariffs to protect our steel industry. This was the story just this past week, which has been very controversial because there's some suggestion that this might actually violate WTO rules, and these tariffs aren't actually justified under the WTO agreements. And the issue there, of course, is nobody wants steelworks in this country to close. These are high-skilled, high-paid jobs that are very important in their local economies, but they're, relatively speaking, tiny compared to the rest of the economy and all of the jobs that rely on the use of steel and who are punished by high steel prices. Construction, manufacturing, we all rely on all of these kinds of parts of the economy. And, making politicized decisions about which products should be made more expensive based oftentimes on which marginal constituencies might be considered to be in play is not a very good way to run a trade policy, and is very much at odds with consumer welfare and free trade values.
Speaking of the values of the Conservative Party fundamentally, do you think we earlier in the show were discussing the fact that there could be a coal mine that gets the go-ahead in Cumbria, for example? Do you think this is the start of Boris Johnson starting to think, after coming a little bit too close for comfort in that confidence vote, do you think this is him saying, all right, I need to start appealing a little bit more to my backbenchers here, so we're going to say yes to this coal mine because we still need coal in this country, Victoria, and we're going to say yes to slashing tariffs on food that we can't produce here in Britain? Is this Boris showing a bit of Brexity leg to his backbenchers?
Well, it is an interesting side of the current political dynamic with that instability that the Prime Minister clearly feels, where he is going to be more susceptible to particular priorities of important, influential groups of his backbenchers, and indeed the party membership as a whole, who might have a vote in any upcoming leadership election. So yes, the coal mining, the potential to get on with that open cast coal mining in Cumbria. Is it open cast or is it a deep mine? I can't remember. But similarly also, the fracking review, getting on with fracking in a scientifically credible way would make potentially a huge difference for our energy security and all of these things that are just at the moment dragging down our economic growth and punishing consumers. So yes, if the political dynamic at the moment brings Boris Johnson back in touch with traditional conservative values of low taxes and a small government, that could be really quite beneficial development.
Absolutely. So are you optimistic then on a scale? I'm not going to ask you, Victoria, to play the role of Mystic Meg here. Yeah. Are you optimistic though?
I'm slightly growing in my optimism that the government might be edging towards coming back to some free market, free trade values, reversing out of some of the nanny state things that they were previously committed to, like the buy one, get one free ban. Those things are falling by the wayside, almost because, you know, these kinds of policies are unjustifiable in a time of economic hardship. So I feel like this is being driven not by any miraculous rediscovery of principle, but actually just by necessity, political necessity and economic necessity.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much for your insight there, Victoria. That was Victoria Hewson, the Head of Regulatory Affairs at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Of course, discussing there the potential removal of trade tariffs on food. I think most of these things are just common sense, folks. That's what it comes down to. But here, it's time for Grime Watch, a time when we look at what you at home have been saying. Your gob is much more important than my own, folks, I'll tell you that much. Now, in the light of Nicola Sturgeon and her quest for Scottish independence, never-ending that it is, I took to Twitter and I said this: Nicola Sturgeon wants to put the question, should Scotland be an independent country, to Scottish voters again. Only that's not what she's really asking them. In leaving the UK, Scotland would become a client state of Brussels. How does that look anything like independence? A lot of you got in touch about that, so let's see what you had to say. Mac said, independence would allow Scotland to decide what relationship we have with the EU. That's what independence offers, as well as choice over our national government, Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. Well, no, it doesn't actually, because if you join the European Union, Scotland would be a diminished power, a much smaller economy than it is right now within the UK, within our family of nations. And actually, all you'd be doing is a plaything of Brussels. What is that in the terms of independence? Ed said, the Scottish overwhelmingly voted to remain in the EU. So by getting rid of England, they get what they democratically voted for. Well, look, I think actually, were you to say to the Scottish people, the choice is Westminster or Brussels, they'd recognise quite easily, given that the polls don't show an overall majority for Scottish independence, quote-unquote independence, I actually think the Scottish people would look at that and say, well, this doesn't sound like independence to me. Free movement of people. How are you going to do that with a border? Are we going to rebuild Hadrian's Wall? And I know some don't write in, folks, and say Hadrian's Wall is not the border with Scotland. I know it's not. Don't kill me for really, really weakening my North East credentials there. But Pedro said, I do believe a vote for independence and democracy needs to be had. However, it will take at least 10 years for Scotland to become a full member of the EU, if it happens at all. Europe might be a very different place by then. And Pedro, I think that's a really good question, a really good point, rather, to make, because the EU is changing at a rapid pace, actually. The bringing together, that harmonisation of monetary and political union means that the independence that you're afforded within the club is going to get, will be fewer and fewer policy levers that you can pull on a national level as more and more control is really sucked into the centre, into Brussels, into that unelected bureaucracy of the European Union. And that would be my case, folks. That would be my argument against Scotland thinking it could be independent within the EU. And Clive says, how can they be said to regain sovereignty when they want to give up so much fiscal and domestic power to Brussels? Wouldn't they also be obliged to join the euro? That's a really, really good point, Clive, because new member states of the union have to sign up to these political and monetary union attributes, to the parts of the European Union. You cannot pick and choose. And as I say, Scotland will be small, so Scotland won't be able to say, I want to pick and choose, like a pick and mix, what parts of the European Union I want and what parts I don't. It doesn't work like that. But thank you for your views, folks, as ever. It's now 3:47, and next up, the Duchess of Sussex. We didn't see much of her at the Jubilee, did we? But on Thursday, it was revealed that the findings of an investigation into how allegations of bullying made against her were handled won't be made public. The palace has said this is because those who took part confidentially, whilst Meghan continues to, of course, strongly deny all of the accusations made against her, they want to protect these people. So, joining me to discuss this is the royal biographer and commentator Ingrid Seward. Ingrid, thank you very much for your time today. Do you think it was right for the palace to say, no, we're not releasing the findings of these reports, this report even?
Well, I understand that they want to protect the people involved, but I think that it was a mistake not to make it public because it will come out, because everything does. And I feel that, you know, this is going to be an even bigger story because it will eventually come out. I think it will anyway. And I think sometimes the palace should just take a very much stronger stance than they do. I mean, the story is now that it's not to upset Harry and Meghan because, you know, they can be very destructive. You don't know what they're going to say and what they're going to reveal. And apparently the palace are very worried about Harry's forthcoming autobiography, but that makes them look very weak. I just find that hard to believe that they can say, well, we're not going to release any finding of this, because people did come up and they spoke out. Jason Nauf, who was the communications secretary for William and Harry, he spoke out. He was trying to help the people that had left Meghan and Harry's employ. You know, so 3 or 4 people left, and they said they were bullied by the Duchess. But I think it leaves a bad taste whichever way. And this story was, you know, this goes back to 2018, but actually was only released by the Times just before Meghan and Harry made their interview with Oprah Winfrey. So everything's sort of very constructed here.
Ingrid, my colleague Dan Wooten said something I found really rather alarming. He wrote in the Daily Mail the other day that the palace should publish the report's findings if it wants to torpedo Meghan Markle's political ambitions. He can't be serious, can he?
Well, he might be serious, but I don't believe that anyone in America would want Meghan Markle, because
Indeed.
I think that, you know, why would she want to become a political figure? I think that her following is big, but it's very, very narrow in range. And I think, from far as what I can understand, that a lot of people in America have you know, gone off her, as it were. I mean, that's rather a childish expression, but I think a lot of people have lost faith in Meghan. And I don't think that she will become a political figure, because I don't think people would want her to. And whether or not she wants to, we don't know. But I'm not being rude about her. I just don't see why on earth she would want to do that.
Well, indeed, Ingrid. One thing that politicians are always chastised for these days is, of course, keeping their promises. Now, Meghan Markle promised with Prince Harry that they were off to live a more private life. I mean, an interview with Oprah Winfrey, Ingrid, is hardly, in my opinion, going off to be a more private person.
Well, exactly. I mean, this was in March. I think it was March 2021 when they did that interview, and it was, you know, it was a really outspoken interview in which I think probably the most criticised thing from the palace's point of view was when they insinuated that the royal family was racist, or at least somebody within the royal family had made racist remarks. And at least Prince William came out and said there is nothing racist about the royal family, and I think he's absolutely right. Certainly, there is nothing racist about the Queen, and everybody really welcomed Harry and Meghan. So I think people were very hurt that Harry and Meghan turned against them, and now they think it's all going to, you know, Harry's going to reveal all kinds of things in his book. I'm not sure that Harry will reveal anything too unpleasant, because he doesn't have to, because people are going to buy his book anyway, because it's by Harry, or Harry and a ghostwriter. So, I mean, you know, you can't get more original than that. He doesn't actually have to say anything. He can say, I scratched my nose in front of my grandmother, and that would be news.
Ingrid, I'm going to have to leave it there, but we'll get you back on when that book is out, right? And we can go through it and pore through the pages together. That was the royal biographer and commentator Ingrid Seward there. Thank you very much for your time. Now, folks, today marks the end of Pride Month, the month when all of these woke capitalist outfits change their logos to have a pride flag. I have my criticisms, as you might well have guessed there, of modern LGBT plus politics. Sure, lefties and hardliners have hijacked much of the movement today, but at its core, the laudable aim of equality. Huge progress has, of course, been made for gay men and women. That's undeniable. So next, let's have a look at some of the history of Pride, almost exactly 50 years since the Gay Liberation Front marched through central London with around 500 people taken to the streets very bravely, it has to be said, on the 1st of July 1972. Here's GB News' South West of England reporter, Jeff Moody.
50 years on. Some of the original Pride marchers remembering the fire in their bellies that changed the world.
It was exhilarating, it was empowering. We thought we could take over the world and change it to how we feel.
It was about not letting anyone tell you who you are or what you should do. It was about autonomy, it was about freedom, and it was about joy.
There hadn't been a lot of joy for Britain's gay community back in 1972. Homosexuality had only just been decriminalised 5 years before, but the battle for acceptance, for hearts and minds, was only just beginning.
And we marched up Charing Cross Road, we marched along Oxford Street, ending up at Speaker's Corner, heavily guarded by the police who looked, they weren't rude, but they looked distinctly uncomfortable.
Saw us all kissing one another and knew that probably we were committing some sort of criminal offence, but they didn't quite know what to do, so eventually they gave up and went away.
Those who were at the first Pride March were fighting for their freedoms, their rights, their lives.
I simply wanted not to be a criminal. I thought it was outrageous that I'd had to grow up like all my friends under the shadow of the law. But some people spat, some people shouted, most people were kind of astonished, I think, and bewildered. Some people just looked the other way.
Over the years, looking the other way became less of an option. Pride morphed into something altogether more brash, more bold, more in your face. Today's Pride, replicated in nearly every city on earth, is almost unrecognisable from that early march. But then so is the world. Now, here in the UK at least, gay people can marry, adopt children, freedoms those early campaigners never thought they could achieve. Gay rights activist Peter Tatchell was there at the beginning. Does he think, with fewer wars to wage, Pride has somehow lost its bite?
We are very unhappy at the way in which Pride has become over-corporate and commercialised, that it's now become basically just a big party. And parties are fine, but we also need to protest because there's still unfinished business. There are still battles for our community to fight and win.
Battles like Jawed's. He fled Lebanon for fear of being arrested, just for being gay.
For many people it might be just a march, but for me it means much more. It means that I can just walk safely in a place and talk about my problems, talk about my rights, you know, and just also like embrace my sexuality or orientation.
The battles continue and the celebrations too. Party, protest, parade, whatever Pride is in 2022, it means as much to some people today as it did 50 years ago. Jeff Moody, GB News.
You've been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. I thank you very much. But now, folks, here's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK will be showery for many, with the heaviest and most frequent rain across Scotland. Let's take a look at the details. Starting off in the southwest of England, and after a pretty wet morning for some due to a front passing through, you can expect showers to end the day. In the southeast, that front will be moving across, but it has broken up somewhat, so many will just see some showery rain for a time. Across Wales, we can expect further showers, perhaps a few heavy ones too. They'll start to ease as we go through the evening and especially overnight. There'll also be showers across the West Midlands as we go through the evening. They should be fairly scattered, so there'll be some drier and perhaps brighter breaks in between. It looks like there'll be fewer showers around the northeast, but still a few though, so although it's looking mostly dry here, don't rule out some rain at times. A wet picture across much of Scotland. Here the showers are likely to merge into longer spells of rain, especially across western parts with the risk of some thunder. A scattering of showers for Northern Ireland as well. Some heavy ones are likely in the east at first, then there may be a drier spell for a time. Further showery rain is expected overnight, especially for Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst England and Wales should be drier. That's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're